Hello, it's Lucy and Ellie from Roman Found, and today we are hunting down the remains of one of the most important Roman cities in Britain.
The fortress, colonia and capital of southern Britannia, Eboracum, or better known as today, the city of York.
So come along with us as we visit some of the best standing Roman remains in Britain.
Hear the chilling tales of Roman ghosts that still haunt the city and seek out some of the more secret and overlooked traces of Roman structures hidden deep within the city of York.
We've been wanting to visit York since filming our Roman tour of Lincoln, as both settlements were established by the same Roman legionnaires, the 9th Legion Hispana.
We've also heard that it has some of the best Roman remains still left within the modern city, and it just so happens to be the home of one of our good history friends, Rob from Church Crawling, who will be showing us the more hidden evidence of Roman occupation later on in the tour.
But what exactly brought the Romans to York?
So the main reason for the city of York was that of military and strategy. York was established here in 71 AD, and at the time there were already two groups of people who lived in this region, the Brigantes and to the east, the Parisii. So this new fortress was ideally positioned to monitor these two Celtic tribes and to quell any uprisings. But the main reason for the fortress and military presence here was because of an alliance that the Romans had with the queen Cartimandua. And in 69 AD, Cartimandua's rule was threatened by her rival Venetius. Venetius was actually her ex, and he wasn't very happy about it and decided to take her territory. So the Romans had to come up here and help protect her territory and her rule because they'd established important trade links with Cartimandua and these were being threatened.
The very first site on our tour is Treasurer's House, a lavish property and townhouse that was originally built for the Treasurer of York Minster in 1091 AD. You can find this property behind York Minster in Minster Yard.
So much of what you can see today is actually from the rebuild in the late 16th century, so very little of the original house remains. It was last owned by the wealthy industrialist Frank Green, who donated the house and his collection to the National Trust in 1930.
But what's the Roman connection?
Well, despite being built in 1091 AD, the history of Treasurer's House actually goes back right to the Roman occupation, because a Roman road runs underneath the cellar, and it's believed that a colonnaded building would have stood on the site during Roman times, and it's also home to a rather spooky ghost tale.
Sadly, when we visited, there was a mould infestation that had grown over lockdown, rendering the basement uninhabitable for visitors, but the rest of the house remains open for tours.
So this ghostly tale comes from the 1950s, from 1953 to be exact, where a young apprentice plumber called Harry Martindale was working in the basement of Treasurer's House. He was trying to make a hole in the brick ceiling for a pipe, but unwittingly he places his ladder on a section of Roman road that has recently been excavated. At lunchtime he starts hearing strange noises. It's the sound of trumpets coming from the wall, and then Harry gets the fright of his life. It starts with just the figure of a man coming straight through the wall, wearing a plumed helmet, and then is followed a Roman soldier on horseback, and followed after that 20 or more so soldiers marching two abreast just as a legion would have. But the really spooky thing about this is that Harry could only see them from their knees up because they were still marching on the original Roman street level from the 4th century.
There have been no reported sightings since Harry's encounter. We'll have to try and come back when these ghostly tours of the cellar resume. From Treasurer's House, we didn't have far to walk to the next stop on our tour, outside York Minster, the bronze statue of Constantine the Great.
This statue was commissioned by York's Civic Trust to commemorate the accession of Constantine the Great as Roman Emperor in AD 306.
So why is Constantine so great?
Well, when his father Constantius I actually died in the city of York, Constantine the Great was proclaimed as emperor by the army right there in the city, and this went against the system of succession at the time, which proved to be a huge turning point in the history of the Roman Empire because it gave Constantine the power that he needed to go forward and unite the empire back under one ruler. This brought a level of stability back which hadn't been seen in over 80 years. This was because prior to Constantine's rule, the empire had been ruled by a tetrarchy, which was a new system where the rule of 4 separate rulers were combined to govern the two sides of the Roman Empire. Naturally, this was defunct and proved a very flawed system for ruling an empire. But he was also so great because of his work with Christianity. He helped convert the Roman Empire to Christianity and was the first emperor to allow Christians to worship freely, uniting and promoting the faith. This was an act that had a huge impact upon European history and actually shaped the world that we know today.
This statue is not the only Roman site to be spotted outside the Minster. If you turn around, there's an 8-metre tall original Roman column from the Roman Basilica.
This column is actually one of 16 similar columns that would have supported the roof of the basilica, which would have been the main headquarters of Eboracum. But this Roman column is not in its original location, as it was actually found during excavations under York Minster in 1969. It was given by the Dean and Chapter to the York Civic Trust, who in 1971 erected it here on this site to mark the 1900th anniversary of the foundation of the city by the Romans.
So we're checking out this Roman column and we bump into our good friend Rob from Church Crawling.
Hello! How are you?
You never know when there's a camera.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
Rob has an Instagram and YouTube channel all about historic walks to churches around Yorkshire, so he's a perfect person to join our Roman tour. Where are you going to take us, Rob?
We're going to go and have a look around some of the best historic churches in York, which have bits of Roman archaeology and history present in them. We're going to walk some of the city defences, the Roman and the medieval, and just have a look for some of the lesser known heritage sites around the city centre.
So where should we head first?
We're going to go to the Multangular Tower and the Anglian Tower first and around a couple of churches, but whilst we're starting at the Minster, if we head down Stonegate, which is named because it was one of the first stone-paved streets in Roman York, that'll take us to St Helens Square. But Stonegate is one of the original Roman streets, crossing with Petergate, so it's a really good way for us to walk down and get a sense of the old city layout.
Yeah, because wouldn't that have been one of the ways that they would have come into the city?
One of the main ways they would have come in, yeah.
The very main way, because Stonegate was actually the Via Praetoria, which is the main street leading from the front of the headquarters building to the front gate, the Great Southwest Gate, which is actually marked by a plaque and a cobble line in St Helens Square. And the original Roman road still lays 6 feet below this surface today. And there also happens to be a church that Rob is rather keen to show us here too.
So of all of York's medieval parish churches surviving today, there's about 19 or 20 of them, originally about 45 to 50 in the early 15th century to the early 16th century. This is the only one with a dedication that has a slight Roman connection, so it's dedicated to St Helen, who was the mother of Constantine the Great, who has a big connection to York.
From St Helens Square we head to the Museum Gardens, which is home to the best example of standing Roman remains in York.
Welcome to the Multangular Tower, so named because it actually has 10 sides, and this tower is one of 2 very important corner towers which would have stood at the north and the south of the fortress. In between this tower there would have been 6 interval towers, and these corner and interval towers are a bit of a military innovation by the Romans because they would allow soldiers to fire along the sides of the wall as invaders would try to scale them. Facing the River Ouse, this was a very important defence for the Romans.
So the lower half of what you can see today with the small stones is of Roman construction, whereas the upper half was constructed during the medieval period. But these aren't the only interesting stones to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, as we walk around the back of the Multangular Tower, Rob points us out these rather odd stones that are embedded around the path.
Yeah, so when you walk around the museum gardens, in all the rockeries and the sort of gardened areas, they're lined with old fragments of medieval masonry from St Mary's Abbey ruins, which was the old Benedictine ruin in what is today the museum gardens, dissolved at the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century.
But these aren't the only interesting stones scattered across the museum gardens.
And you may have spotted them already, and these are these huge stone coffins which have been rather quirkily reused as planters. And quite a few of these are actually Roman coffins, as loads of Roman coffins were discovered all over York during a lot of building work of the 19th century. So within this one ancient museum gardens, we've got medieval history, Norman history, Roman history, all intertwined into one amazing, impressive site.
But our investigations of the museum gardens aren't over yet, as Rob has one more stop on the agenda.
So a minor landmark that Ellie and Lucy didn't know about, which I thought I'd show them, is just behind the Multangular Tower in the museum gardens. It's a tower called the Anglian Tower, and it's constructed in a breach in the Roman fortress wall, and it was only revealed in 1969 during a period of quite extensive archaeological investigations across the city centre into York's Roman history. It's generally attributed to the late Roman rather than post-Roman period, and it exhibits some great limestone masonry.
It's now time to cross the River Ouse into the walled civilian settlement of the Roman city. To do this, we walk over the Ouse Bridge just down from the museum gardens.
So the present bridge was constructed in 1821, but the original bridge over the River Ouse would have been built by the Romans, because the Romans were rather revolutionary bridge builders, famous for their stone bridges, which come complete with arches, quite similar to the arch bridge that we can see today. And it has been said that one of the substances that allowed the Roman Empire to become such an architectural force was mortar, an essential of bridge building.
Over this side of the river, we can find some of Rob's favourite churches that he wanted to share with us, both hidden gems that contain Roman remains.
So this is the Church of All Saints on North Street, and it has a rather complicated architectural history, but essentially it was built from the late 12th century to the 15th century, and that's what we experience inside the church today. But what I wanted to show Ellie and Lucy was the gritstone column, which was used to build the choir in the late 13th century, probably painted over until relatively recently, so it will have gone unacknowledged for such a long time.
It's not every day that you can visit a church and it's being held up by evidence of Roman columns. I mean, that is astounding, and you can really see the difference between the pinky colour gritstone and the much lighter medieval stone used to tack it all together, basically.
Yeah, so
this is the original.
in the medieval period, this was installed here in some point in the 13th century, possibly. So. But these grooves and these dints and stuff are probably from where there were screens across the different chapels in the medieval period.
And these medieval people love reusing Roman stones, and you can find evidence of it all across structures across the UK.
It's definitely a theme that we're seeing in a lot of these medieval churches.
Often they're even reusing bits of Roman wall just because the Romans were such good stonemasons and they were so good at their craft that it was a shame not to use it.
But just another word to say that this church is such a brilliant exhibition of medieval art. It has at least 10 windows, probably more, of 14th and 15th century glass, some of the best of it that you'll see in a parish church in this country.
Sancta Lucia, ora pro nobis, which means Saint Cecilia, pray for me, Saint Lucy, pray for me.
And hidden on these very windows, it had an eyes-only find, a spill of hammered coins over someone's sickbed.
One thing that we've seen a lot on these Roman tours, especially during the Roman tour of London, was the evidence of medieval recycling, where they just simply reused Roman structures because the Romans were such good stonemasons it would have been much harder to tear them down and much more of a shame to let the stone go to waste than to simply reuse them, which is why it's so incredible to see the evidence of Roman stone being reused as columns here in this medieval church. So there were two particular churches that Rob wanted to show us which had these hidden secret Roman remains, and we're off to the second one, so where are you taking us, Rob?
We're going to the Church of St Mary on Bishop Hill Junior, which is on the southwest side of the Ouse, so the same side as All Saints North Street. And the real reason I want to come here and show you guys this is because it has one of the oldest church towers standing in York, and it incorporates some reused Roman masonry because this side of the river was the civilian settlement, and whilst we don't know a lot about the archaeology of the standing Roman sites at the time, we do know that a lot of the masonry was reused by the early medieval settlers to build things such as this church tower. So it's got great big bits of limestone and sandstone and also bits of brick as well.
Once again, more incredible evidence of the medieval people recycling the Roman stone that was just too good to throw away.
Now you can't visit York without walking on its famous walls, and they just so happen to bring us on a wonderful loop back round into the Roman fortress.
York city walls were originally established in 71 AD, where they were built to protect the 9th Legion from these local Celtic tribes, and they survived right into the 9th century when York was invaded by the Danish Vikings, and it was then that the Vikings buried the existing Roman wall under an earth bank and topped it with a palisade, which was a tall fence of pointed wooden stakes. This palisade was then replaced in the 13th and 14th centuries with the stone wall that we can see today, but much of the original Roman wall actually still lies beneath this medieval wall, which you can walk on, and in places it even follows the same route as the original Roman walls.
And the main thing that these walls were protecting currently lies right underneath York Minster, and it's got to be the tourist site that you have to do whilst you're in York.
When around with church crawling, we have to go to one of the biggest churches, well, cathedrals in York, surely.
Yeah, York Minster. I mean, it's got to be done when you're here. It's got some of the biggest expanses of stained glass of any cathedral or parish church in England. The east window is world famous by John Thornton of Coventry in the early 15th century, but we were just enjoying all the monuments and a lot of the Roman archaeology in the Undercroft, and it was just a good time.
So it costs us £16 to get into York Minster, and that was each, but once inside you can get everywhere else for free. And York Minster actually lies directly above the main Roman headquarters, which would have been called the Basilica. The Basilica would have been built in 100 AD, only 29 years after Eboracum was founded, and it would have been a huge civic building intended for use as a courthouse and other public functions. They would usually have been seated next to a forum, but none have been discovered in York yet.
Much of the basilica can be seen in the Undercroft Museum, which closes at 4 PM, which is where we're headed to now.
So Rob, have you ever actually visited all of the Roman ruins that are hidden beneath the Minster?
I know they're there, but I have to admit I haven't really paid much attention to them. When I go down into the museum in the Undercroft, I tend to head straight for the medieval section and pass the Roman stuff by, so it was really great to experience that with some of your knowledge as well.
So the Basilica would have been huge. It would have stretched 72 metres and would have been as high as the present Minster's nave, so it would have been massive. But in the Undercroft you can see all of the excavations, where the foundations have been revealed for this Basilica. The first excavations would have taken place in 1965 to 72, which was purely because emergency work was needed to stabilise the collapsing central tower of York Minster, and without it we might not know that the Basilica existed here. But one of our favourite things that we saw inside the museum is this large piece of the fortress principal wall, as well as a large section of the elaborately painted piece of wall plaster which came from a little anteroom which would have been added to the main hall in the 4th century, used purely by the commanding and senior officers, which is why it's so elaborate.
There's also an array of artefacts on display, from Roman coins to pottery, sherds and personal artefacts such as intaglios and brooches, so it's well worth the visit.
But there's so much to see inside York Minster itself. I mean, like Rob's already said, there's some incredible stained glass, and just wandering around in this really historic cathedral, there's just some incredible pieces of architecture, mosaics, everything. You just need to get to grips and get everywhere. Go hunting, go exploring, and have a real look around whilst you're there. If you're liking our digging adventures, please remember to hit that subscribe button and follow our channel. But all of the Roman things to be seen inside York Minster aren't just in the Undercroft Museum, as there is one little exciting bit which is in the crypt, where they have the base of one of the Roman columns for you to throw some change down for maybe some luck. And Rob also has a little tip for exploring ancient spaces, which is to do with some of the other columns which are into the crypt.
One of the great things to do is when you're going around such a dark old church building is to get the light on your phone out and shine it against some of the masonry, and every now and again you'll find some graffito or a big cluster of graffiti, and you don't know how old it is. Sometimes it's dated, sometimes it isn't, but here we were able to see some of the mason's marks on the Norman pillars, which is really great in these dark conditions, so it's definitely a pro tip.
So throughout this whole day of exploring Roman York, what's your favourite part been, Rob?
I've got to say it's probably been the Multangular Tower and the Anglian Tower, and just having a good old explore of the ruins behind it and seeing all the coffins. What was your guys' favourite bit?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like but we've seen so much. I think my favourite bit had to be the columns inside the All Saints Church on North Street. I don't know, that just like really stuck with me, it kind of blew my mind. And I feel like a lot of things we explore on these tours, like in the Roman Lincoln Wall where we saw the Roman tombstone incorporated into a church, it's this medieval reuse of Roman stone.
I think my favourite bit was in the Undercroft at the Minster, which was the painted Roman plaster.
I mean, that bit was mind-blowing that it just survived for so long.
You just walk around this corner, it's just there, and it's just beautiful.
Emerging from the depths of the Undercroft and the crypt, we are heading back out through York Minster, but we're keeping an eye on those stained glass windows as we have learnt to spot quirky medieval eyes-only finds hidden in their artistry, and a lot of them contain depictions of items that we simply would not know what they looked like if we didn't have these beautiful representations. Our favourite little spot on the way out was this cheeky wren trying to catch a spider, which was a whimsical design which is medieval painting at its finest. Once outside the York Minster, we've got one last Roman site to visit, the final stop on our tour.
Just around from York Minster is Monk's Bar, and the access point back onto York City Wall that still follows the original Roman fortress wall.
This Roman fortress wall is quite different to the civilian wall that we've already walked around, and that is because it encloses the main heart of the settlement here at the city of York. Roman fortresses were built to a plan. They would normally enclose a rectangular space of about 50 acres, and inside you'd have a standard grid of streets and buildings, much like we have here at Roman York, and they were all built for one reason, and that was defence. So here on this part of the wall we will have things such as interval towers and corner towers, much like down at the Multangular Tower previously in this video.
After a long day exploring the Roman remains of York, we've all decided it's time for a drink. And where better than at the Roman Bath pub, which is actually on the same site as the original Roman bathhouse.
So we're having a drink where the Romans once bathed, surrounded by history, and Rob has been bringing some really great historical tips to our day, haven't you, Rob? And this is all over from his knowledge doing his YouTube channel.
So my YouTube channel is going on these long walks looking for historic landmarks in Yorkshire and across the rest of England, mostly looking for historic churches and archaeology for buildings and that sort of thing. But I'm on YouTube as Church Crawling and I'm on Instagram as Church Crawling as well.
So you have to go and check him out. And if you're ever here having a drink like us, then be sure to head downstairs to the museum. They've got a whole Roman bathhouse down there, but it shuts at 5 PM, so don't be late.
Thanks again, Rob, for showing us around, and thanks for watching, everyone. If you've loved this episode, be sure to check out Rob's channel and all our other Roman tours in the playlist on our channel.
If you're feeling inspired and want to get out digging, then we've got a 10% discount code off at LP Metal Detecting, so treat yourself to some new gear.
The link's in the description.